And also, it was because yesterday was also Jayananda's disappearance day. I will talk a little bit about him and what he did. He was very instrumental in the last days of his life. I was personally present, so I had some association with him. So I think I have a little bit of a right to deviate a little bit from talking about this verse and talk about yesterday's disappearance day. Jayananda was known for being very instrumental in getting the Rath Yatras organized, and he was especially keen to see that it would happen in Los Angeles, where it had never happened before. At that time, he was very ill. He had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he was restricted to moving about in a wheelchair. So I was with him and Kurandar and someone else who was, anyway, Kurandar and Rameshwar, that was it. They were the leaders of the movement at that time in Los Angeles. One was a GBC, one was the temple president. And so we looked all over the city with Jayananda. He was in the car with us. And we couldn't find a place where there would be Rath Yatra, which would be suitable. Every place seemed to be kind of vacant. That's the nature of the city. We went to the downtown area. We went to Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, and there didn't seem to be any people around. And finally, as a last resort, we went to Venice Beach. And last, there were a lot of people. There were a lot of tourists from other countries and from Los Angeles. We saw strange things, people being pulled on skateboards by dogs and all kinds of weird personalities. And then we thought, well, this is the place. If we have a Rath Yatra, it's going to be here. It had never happened before. And just as we were approaching the end of it, the end of the walkway, ready to go back to the temple, there was a policeman in uniform with his hands akimbo, kind of, like, okay, stop. Like we thought, we're going to get arrested. We're not supposed to be having a wheelchair on this walk or something like that. It was kind of scary. And he stopped us, and he put his hand out to shake hands. And he said, I don't know if you know about this. My name is Sergeant White. I'm with the Los Angeles Police Department. But there was a gunfight in the city last night in the central part of Los Angeles, and one of your men saved the life of one of my men, so I want to thank you. And he said, you know about this? And it's the first time we'd ever heard about anything like this. So and that was the end of that. But we had decided already before, and he shook Jayananda's hand, the man in the wheelchair. So we decided then and there to have the Rath Yatra festival. We didn't get permission, because we had to get a final permission from Rameshwar before we could do it. He was the GVC then, or the temple president. And but Jayananda was relentless. He just thought, well, we'll just go ahead with it anyway. And so he ordered some wood. It cost something like $5,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And all of a sudden, this big pile of timber appeared in the parking lot. And Rameshwar was the president. He was kind of curious. He said, "What is all this? Where did this come from?" And then we informed him that Jayananda actually was in his bed. He had a hospital bed in his apartment. He had ordered this wood to be delivered, and it was delivered. So then that kind of melted the heart of Rameshwar, and he said, well, I guess we have to have the Rath Yatra anyway. How it was going to manifest, or who was going to build the Rath Yatra carts, but it so happened that there was a person who was a very expert engineer and builder, and Jayananda had an engineering degree, so he a construction engineer, so he knew how to do it if there wasn't anyone else to do it. So then the carts were built, and it was quite a momentous event. And at the end of each day, Babu Brahan, a New York devotee, and myself would go to Jayananda and report to him of the events of the day. The whole thing lasted about 2 months, preparing for this big Rath Yatra. And in those days, we did everything ourselves. We sewed banners. Banners were sewed on an industrial sewing machine. We went to the city authorities to get permission to put up banners all over the city, which we did. And we told Jayananda each night what we were doing, and he was always shaking his head saying, I don't know how you guys are doing it. It's just a wonderful thing. And he made us feel like, really important. Like he couldn't do it, but we could do it, and all that sort of thing. And after he passed away, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and read this letter. This is a letter that Prabhupada wrote. It's the only time that he officially recognized a devotee as going back to Godhead after his death. And this is the letter. He wrote it to Jayananda, who was not in his physical body at the time. Please accept my blessings. I am feeling very intensely your separation. In 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give me some contribution, $5,000, for printing my Bhagavad Gita. After that, you have rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death, you are remembering Krishna, and as such, you have been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. That's an indication that he wasn't absolutely sure, but I'll read on and come to the definitive part. You have gone to the celestial kingdom to live with the demigods for many thousands of years if you had any tinge of material desire. You would enjoy the most opulent life of material existence. From there you can promote yourself to the spiritual world. But even if one fails to promote himself to the spiritual world, at that time he comes down again on the surface of the globe and takes birth in a big family like a yogi's or a Brahman's, like it says in Bhagavad Gita, Srimatam Yogadam Srimatam Gehe. At that time he comes down again on the surface of this globe and takes birth in a big family like a yogi's or a Brahman's or an aristocratic family. And there is again a chance of reviving Krishna consciousness. Here is the crunch, the crucial part. But as you are hearing Krishna Kirtan, I am sure that you are directly promoted to Krishna Loka. In his last days, he was not only chanting, but he was hearing a tape recording of Prabhupada chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. And then Prabhupada writes, he continues, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vedi tattvataha tyaktva deham purna janma naiti mameti sorjana. Krishna has done a great favor to you, not to continue your diseased body, and has given you a similar suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. So that's the end of the letter. There's another thing I want to read if we have time, but I'll go on and tell a little about this Rath Yatra. It was quite a very great event. A lot of people came, maybe 50 or 100,000 or something like that. And it was right on the grassy area of Venice Beach. I don't know if it still exists, but there was 3 chariots and 3 big elephants, all decorated. It was kind of an unusual event. Prabhupada was very, very pleased with the New Dwarka, Los Angeles devotees, for what they did. At one time, someone said that if you speak, I'll record everything on 35 millimeter cameras, and it'll be televised all over the country. And Prabhupada said, if you do this, I'll just stay here in Los Angeles. I won't go anywhere. I won't travel. This was in 1972. Well, it never came to pass that was broadcasted all over the country. But he did. It was kind of like a prognostication of what's going on now. Now there's a lot of preaching going on over the internet, and probably this talk that I'm giving now is reaching thousands of people. But Prabhupada was very keen about staying there because he liked the resources. And there's a Hindi proverb that I don't know how it goes exactly in Hindi, but it says that there's a blind man and a lame man, and the lame man, if he climbs on the shoulders of the visionary person who's stout and strong, then the two of them together can do wonderful things. So he was comparing India to the layman, which is India is known as a poverty-stricken country, and America the United States as being the powerful, robust human being, very resourceful. He said if the resources of America, Prabhupada said this, are combined with the vision of India, then wonderful things can happen. This is what was one of his modus operandi, in which he used everything. He used telephones, airplanes, automobiles, computers, dictaphones. that, and he said that his mudra, unlike many sadhus who said, this is my mudra, don't give me any money, I won't touch that, it's all filthy lucre. But my mudra is like this. Whatever you give me, I'll use it for Krishna. And he did that. And that's what made Krishna consciousness so powerful all over the world. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but back to this Ratha Yatra. It was a very big event. And it was such a big event that one devotee got very inspired, and she went to the, at that time there were 3 main television networks, CBS, ABC, and NBC. And she went to the CBS national that was watched by maybe, in the evening, it was maybe by 10 or 20 million people. So somehow or other she got into this place. She was all restricted, full of guards and everything, but she used her charm, and she got to see the national director, the person who made decisions about what would be broadcast on the national news. And he was very, very touched by the presentation. She had a big portfolio, those things that artists carry around with them. I forget what they're called exactly. And she showed him a lot of pictures, and he was very impressed. And he said, "I'm going to do this." So then at the Ratha Yatra, another miraculous thing happened. The crew, the television crew, there was a lady, and her name was, I remember her name is Lovejoy, Karen Lovejoy. We might say Care and Lovejoy, but her name was Karen Lovejoy. Anyway, Karen Lovejoy was the reporter, and she had a sound person and a video person with her. And out of the thousands of people that she approached, she happened to approach Jayananda's parents. And she said, "May I know your names, please?" And they said, "Oh, we're Mr. and Mrs. Kaur." And she said, "Where are you from?" She said, "Oh, we're from Grand Junction, Colorado." And Grand Junction, Colorado is like a long ways away. It's about 1,600 kilometers from Los Angeles. She said, "What are you doing here? Why did you come here to this?" And she said, "Well, our son built these chariots, these carts, and he died about a month ago." So this became the feature of that news program that night, because it was such a tear-jerking thing that the parents of this deceased devotee who built the carts came to this festival. So it was kind of like the end of the day. We all I assembled in a room with 3 or 4 other people, and we watched this news event. And somehow or other, the newscaster had a picture of the Jagannath temple behind him when he was doing it, and it was not a very long broadcast, but it was about 7 or 8 minutes long, and it was watched by literally millions of people. So that was I mean, many other things happened, but that made it like millions of people saw Lord Jagannath's Ratha Yatra. It was not just an ordinary thing; it was extraordinary. So it kind of was the final crown it crowned the event, which in itself was very wonderful. It was a very sunny day, full of people, full of elephants, giving rides to children, and things that people had never seen before. And I think we have a little time. I'm going to read from a letter that a schoolmate of Jayananda's wrote. He was the person he was like the person who would keep in contact with all the schoolmates. Every year they had like a reunion or something like that. So his name was Andrew Hollam, and he lived in San Marino, California, which is not far away from Los Angeles, maybe a 10-minute or 20-minute drive. I want to tell you about my Christmas vacation trip to Durban, South Africa. Rather than read the letter, I'll just tell you what happened. He saw this picture. Somehow or other, he went to Durban, South Africa. Durban is Chatsworth or near Johannesburg, South Africa. I don't know the country too well. It's a fairly big place. And still to this day, the Ratha Yatra is famous. There's a hillside. I went there a couple of times. A hillside in Durban, and in flowers they have a painting, so to speak, of the Ratha Yatra. It's that famous. So anyway, this guy, this Andrew Hallam, saw a picture of Jayananda in the Ratha Yatra car, and somehow he just came to see what was happening in Durban, because Durban is, he went in the time of the year when it's sunny and warm down there, and it's kind of an interesting place anyway. And then he went on to Cape Town. But he saw this picture, and he thought he recognized the person, but he wasn't sure who it was because of the shaved head and the years had gone by and so on. And then he started asking people, who is that guy? And they said, oh, that's Jayananda. And that didn't mean anything to him either, the name Jayananda. And finally, he approached a person who knew that his name was Jim Kaur. And then he recognized the name. So he so somehow or other this man made a phone call to Los Angeles, all the way from South Africa, to Jim Kaur. His father's name was Jim Kaur Sr. And he found, he did a little bit of investigative work. He found out that he knew that Jim Kaur Sr. worked for Sherman & Williams Paint Company. So he called the paint company, and by, he got the telephone number of Jim Kaur, who was no longer with the company. He had retired. And he told him, you know who your son is? He's a famous person in the Hare Krishna movement. His picture a framed picture was in one of their parades. And so he went on and told this was his letter to the classmates. He said, I'm going to tell you about an old classmate of ours named Jim Kaur, and how he's very famous now. So this was the letter. And then he went on to write, kind of mundane things about, what the news was. And he went to I think it was in Dayton, Ohio. He went to Oakwood High School. He was a high school classmate of his. So that's that story. So I think we're running a little bit over time. But should I go on? Okay. There's a little, it's not so little, but there's a I'm going to pass this around. It's got some photographs of Jayananda. It was written by a devotee named Kalakanta, not Kalakanta the cow protection, but Kalakanta in Alachua. He wrote a lot of things about Jayananda. I don't know if I can read this because I don't have my specs. It's very small type. I'll try anyway. Therefore, Jayananda was the all-American boy, handsome, strong, intelligent, born in a middle-class family. Thank you. Jayananda, Jim Kaur, took a degree in mechanical engineering. That's mechanical engineering from Chiku State University. With a background like that, it is surprising that Jayananda ended up as a cab driver in San Francisco. Karandar once asked me why he didn't get a better paying job. Quote, I didn't fit in with the upper class crowd, he said. Always introspective in nature, Jayananda felt empty and satisfied within himself during his college years. He would often say that he was never happy before joining Krishna consciousness. His depression was almost suicidal when in 1967 he read a small article in a San Francisco paper about an Indian Swami who had come to the Bay Area to propagate the chanting of the names of God. Jayananda recalled feeling a, quote, ray of hope, end quote, when he read that article. Thinking that the Swami may have something to offer, Jayananda made up his mind to attend the Swami's lectures. Srila Prabhupada, that's all right, you don't have to stand there. I think I can read it. Srila Prabhupada's early lectures in the Bay Area were mostly attended by hippies, and Jayananda was one of the only, quote, straight, end quote, people there. Jayananda later recalled that I wasn't much of a religionist, but I was attracted by Srila Prabhupada. He was especially fond of attending the early morning lectures because at that time, that's Jayananda was especially fond, because at that time most of the hippies would be in bed, or on some occasions Jayananda would be the only guest listening to Srila Prabhupada speak the Bhagavatam. I'll just hold this myself. Srila Prabhupada was always fond of Jayananda, and sometimes he would invite his budding disciple to take prasad with him in his room. Srila Prabhupada would cook prasadam and serve me, Jayananda recalled. He didn't say anything, he just kept feeding me, and I kept eating. Jayananda soon donated his life savings of $5,000 to Srila Prabhupada to help His Divine Grace print the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Actually, it was for the timber that made the Rath Yatras, but he was kind of vague about what it was for. As more and more devotees joined ISKCON in the Bay Area, Jayananda continued to work as a cab driver and supported the temple by contributing all of his earnings. And then there's some nice pictures. I'll pass this around when I'm done. Chandanacharya Prabhu remembers this special feature about Jayananda. Quote, "He was completely enamored by Krishna consciousness. Even when he'd go out on incense runs all by himself, he would rise every morning before 4, have a little Mangal Arti, chant all his rounds, read and cook prasadam. He never deviated. He loved it. He was completely happy as long as he was practicing Krishna consciousness." Quote, "Take prasadam, for example, Jayananda worship prasadam. When a little prasad spilled on the floor, he would always bend down on all fours and lick it up. He loved to cook, offer, distribute, and eat prasadam in a big way. He would always take prasadam with him and distribute it, whether he was making a boga run, buying bulk foods from the market, or taking a chanting party downtown. He would even say, prasadam is in a special way, prasadam is special. And in a special way, it made you want to take some. Jayananda knew how to attract people to Krishna consciousness with prasadam with the prasadam weapon. When a new devotee came, for example, Jayananda would see to it that he was sumptuously fed with prasadam. When Jambavan was becoming a devotee, Jayananda would bring him a plate of prasadam so big that he could never eat it all. When he finally did finish the plate, Jayananda immediately put an identical plate down before him. "I can't eat that," said Jambavan. "Srila Prabhupada said that we should eat till we waddle like a duck," said Jayananda. Jambavan would finish the second plate. Of course, Jayananda himself would be fond of honoring large quantities of prasadam any day or night, any time. He was the kind of devotee who would come up to you at 10 o'clock with some peanut butter, halava, and say, "Hey Prabhu, come here, check this out." Another example of his attachment to Krishna consciousness is Jayananda's love for kirtan, chanting. Jayananda was always eager to take the whole temple out on Harinam chanting parties. He had a special attraction for chanting in the streets. Whether kirtan was held in the temple or in the street, Jayananda could always be seen dancing and chanting enthusiastically. When he was making Maharaj Das into a devotee, Jayananda would visit his house and have big kirtans. Even when there were only 2 of them, they would jump and chant, "Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol." Also, Karanda recalls how one day, after working very hard for 10 hours straight, Jayananda suddenly announced, "Hey, it's 10 to 7, let's go to Arti." Everyone else was so tired that Arti was the last thing on their minds, but Jayananda quickly jumped into the shower and then bounced down to the temple room to Arti. Of all the processes of Krishna consciousness, Jayananda was most attached to preaching, whether it was during the Sunday feast, while making incense runs, or while building Rath Yatra carts. Jayananda was always trying to find some person with whom he could share his ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. His preaching was very simple and easy to listen to. Quote, "We just have to keep chanting and have faith in the name," end quote. And then there's another quote, "We just have to chant and take prasadam. Srila Prabhupada is so kind to give us such a simple process." Karanda remembers how Jayananda preached to him on his first day in the temple. As they worked together, preparing a little garden for Srila Prabhupada at the old Los Angeles temple, Jayananda said, "You know, things don't just always go right in Krishna consciousness, but you have to keep chanting." At that time, Karanda couldn't imagine how anything could go wrong in Krishna's service. Years later, however, as he found himself still remembering those words, Karandar could appreciate the real potency of what Jayananda had said. So many things may come and go, quote, so many things may come and go, just have faith in the name, end quote. Jayananda's preaching was very attractive to the non-devotees. Chandanacharya recalls seeing Jayananda engaged in preaching. Late one night, it was 11:30 and Jayananda was up, fixing a broken down Sankirtan van. As he lay on his back, working under the van, he preached to the hippies who were standing nearby. All they could see of him was a pair of legs, but they stood up listening, but they stood by listening, completely absorbed as Jayananda worked and preached away. As soon as he felt a person was at all ready, Jayananda would preach to him about chanting and about Srila Prabhupada. There was no protocol or strict etiquette, just sincere and confidential glorification of Krishna. True to his character, Jayananda was seen preaching to guests from his wheelchair. Even during his last days in this world, devotees who knew him could tell from a distance exactly what he was saying. You have to have faith in the name. So this is a bit long. One thing I do remember is that before he came to Los Angeles, he was in New York, in Manhattan, in the hospital, and people would bring him prasadam. So one day he had a big tub of pakoras, specially made for him. It probably had about 30 or 40 pakoras in it, and people were afraid to eat that many, but Jayananda ate it all. It was pretty, and he took all the intravenous things out of his arm and walked out of the hospital to the chagrin of many of the surgeons who were watching over him. He said, "You're going to die," but he did it anyway. He just walked out of the hospital, and as he walked out of the hospital, he saw that the man who had come to see him, Chitsukananda, was preaching to several people in the waiting area. So that was part of one of his pastimes. He was so attached to preaching. Humility was certainly Jayananda's most prominent quality. He treated everyone as a superior, even new devotees. Maharaj Das remembers that Jayananda was always asking his advice. Quote, "Hey, Bhakta Mike, what do you think of this?" End quote. All his service was glorious. He never wanted any glory. He avoided praise like the plague. Devotees got to know that if they wanted to be around him, they'd better not praise Jayananda. Otherwise, he would just simply leave. Once when he was with Danavir, someone came to Jayananda and began praising him. Jayananda just ignored it. Later, he turned to Danavir and said, quote, "You know, if you've been around this movement for many years, people naturally offer you some respect," end quote. Not that his service or qualities were so great. He was just around a few years, and this was his humble thinking. If anyone ever spoke about himself at all, Jayananda would speak so humbly that Lochan Das recalls, quote, "It was difficult not to think of yourself as being better than him. If you had any reason to be puffed up, Jayananda would bring it out in you," quote, end quote. Feeling himself unworthy, he would step aside so that others could lead kirtan, give classes, do the artik. Instead, he could be found fixing cars, unplugging toilets, washing dishes, or taking out trash. Once a new boy came to visit San Francisco Temple. He wanted to help, so Keshava Das sent him to the trash area, where Jayananda was preparing a weekly trash run. Jayananda told the boy, quote, "I'm the garbage man around here. For years I've been watching garbage men carry out trash, and now Krishna is giving me a chance to do this for him," end quote. The boy not only helped load the trash, but accompanied Jayananda to the garbage dump. Later the boy became a devotee, and he recalled thinking, if the garbage men in this temple can be so merciful, garbage men at this temple can be so blissful, just imagine what the rest of the devotees are like. Karanda recalls another incident of Jayananda's humility. Quote, one day before Rath Yatra, I spent the whole day running around with Jayananda. By the time we got back to the temple, it was midnight. The whole building was so crowded that we couldn't find any space to lie down. Finally, we found one room in the little storage closet. I was so tired that all I could do was throw my sleeping bag on the floor and lie down. Then I saw Jayananda walking out of the room. I asked him, "Where are you going?" He said he'd be right back, but I kept pressing him. And finally he explained that he had some rounds of japa chanting to finish up. He didn't want to keep me awake by chanting in our room, nor did he want me to feel bad because he was going out to do something else. He just wanted to slip away to come and fulfill his vow. I remember him saying, sometimes it's not possible to finish all one's rounds because there's so much to do. That's okay, I'm not too tired, Jayananda replied. I was amazed not only by his consideration for me, but by his full submission to Srila Prabhupada. Although perfectly qualified, Jayananda was reluctant to take a post as temple president or sannyasi. It was not that he wouldn't or couldn't do it. He would do whatever he was asked. He was happiest just to be working under someone. In this way, he was the backbone of the Bay Area's ISKCON temple for years. Though frequently changing administration, he would always faithfully serve the acting temple president. He was very special, and yet no one paid any special attention to him. That's just the way that he liked things. Then this subheading is called Jayananda's service attitude. Jayananda was always ready to do whatever was necessary to push on Krishna consciousness. He was expert at everything: cooking, preaching, deity worship, public relations, sankirtan, selling incense, construction, and everything else it takes to run a temple. He was a tireless worker. He would be the first one in the morning up, and the last one to sleep at night. It was Jayananda who was always running out to get the flowers, Jayananda who was washing dishes and making sure the kirtan was clean, the kitchen was clean. Jayananda who was often missing class while he was out doing some service, and Jayananda who was always encouraging others to go out and preach, and seeing the example and setting the example himself. Whatever assignment he was given, he would always get done, even if he had to suffer personally for it. No matter how hard he was working, he would never stop for a nap during the day. He seemed inexhaustible. Jambavan Prabhu remembers that many times the San Francisco devotees would go out to Berkeley to distribute the leftover prasadam after a Sunday feast. First, Jayananda would be in the kitchen cleaning. Then someone would say, "Hey, how about this? How about this leftover prasadam?" Jayananda would say, "Okay, first let's get this kitchen clean." He would organize the cleanup crew and then work twice as hard as anybody. Then he would transfer the prasadam, load it, and the devotees into the van, drive the van to Berkeley, organize the distribution of prasad, and while we distributed. In later years, when he was with Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party, Jayananda would help manage and sustain the traveling program, and simultaneously do all-day Sankirtan, day in and day out, side by side with brahmacharis scarcely half his age. When he joined, he was about 30 years old, and we thought, oh, this is really a good indication that an older person, we were all in our early 20s or teenagers, that an older person who was a taxi driver was joining the movement. We were very impressed. Jayananda's freedom from fault finding is the next subheading. Those who knew Jayananda always noticed one remarkable quality about him. He could not criticize others. It was against his nature. Even if devotees did something which was unwarranted, which warranted criticism, Jayananda would usually say nothing, or else something that made the mistake appear to be perfectly understandable. No matter who was giving class or leading kirtan, he would always appreciate it. He never spoke harsh words or chastised anybody. If one devotee was criticizing another within the earshot of Jayananda, Jayananda would simply leave. Rather than criticize others, Jayananda would contribute nothing less than positive Krishna consciousness, giving energy to any situation. Sometimes devotees would bring up their expansive aspirations to spreading Krishna consciousness. Jayananda would always encourage their ideas, however extraordinary. All at the same time, he was not a fool. He could always pick the right man to do a particular duty. Because he knew how to encourage people, the temple leaders would always assign new men to work with Jayananda. He saw no distinction between new devotees and old devotees. Both were his superiors. He could quickly give a new man a sense of identity and a feeling that he belonged to Krishna consciousness. A true Vaishnava, he was expert at fanning any little spark of Krishna consciousness into a big fire. Few will dispute the claim that Jayananda made more devotees and helped more pull through than anyone else in the movement. And then the next heading is called Dear to Everyone. Like the 6 Goswamis, Jayananda was, quote, dear both to the gentle and the ruffians, end quote. He was as much at home with the Italians at the produce market as with the brahmacharis in the temple. He would simply make friends on street sankirtan. He would make friends with friends on street sankirtan, and they would often come to inform. I think I'm going to fix this so it's steady. That's better. He would make friends on street sankirtan, and they would often come up to him and say, quote, hey, where have you been? Once a devotee was approached by a staggering drunk in San Francisco. The drunk looked at his robes and asked the devotees, hey, quote, hey, where's my old friend Jayananda, end quote. Many devotees, including Danavir, met Chandanacharya. And they had the experience of taking over Jayananda's old territory on incense selling runs, or boga runs. They would meet people who said such things as, quote, where is Johnny Ananda, or that man? He's the nicest and most pure man I've ever met. One man told Chandanacharya, well, I don't know how much your philosophy, but if that Jayananda is into it, then it must be all right. There was an incident once where just before this was after Jayananda passed away, we had a San Francisco, I was not at the meeting, but I heard about this, with the police chief named Chief Cahill. Lots of Irishmen were policemen in those days. Cahill. And the Chief Cahill was surrounded by a number of people who were part of his contingent. They were city councilors and so on. And one of the ladies said, "Where's Johnny Ananda?" And someone reluctantly said, "Oh, he passed away about 3 months ago or whatever it was." And she began to sniffle and left the room, just unable to control her anguish. Anyway, that happened. She was very attached to Jayananda. Once near the Rath Yatra cart worksite, Jayananda invited Krishna to step inside a bar and meet some friends of his. They walked inside, and immediately some 25 faces looked up and smiled brightly. Someone said, "Oh, this must be your friend you were telling us about, the temple president." They presented the two devotees with a sack full of vegetarian groceries, which they had chipped in together to buy. He had become the temple president in San Diego because he was the most mature of everyone who joined. He would solve their problems, he would listen to their complaints, and he had a kind of fatherly or grandfatherly attitude that people liked. So even though he was new on the scene, he was the oldest devotee and the most mature person in the temple, and therefore he was elected the temple president. The devotees loved Jayananda and asked about him during a long drive or on traveling Sankirtan. He was dear to them because he had a sense of humor. Jambavan recalls being awakened one night at midnight by Jayananda. Quote, "Wake up," said Jayananda, end quote. Quote, "I've got a benediction for you." He then pushed a big samosa into the sleepy Jambavan's mouth. Like Maharaj Yudhisthira, Jayananda's enemy was never born. Then the subheading is called Expert at Engaging Everyone. Jayananda was very eager to see everyone engaged in Krishna's service. He once wrote, quote, "When I reflect on my consciousness, had I not had association with devotees and Srila Prabhupada, I shudder to imagine the nightmare I would be in. If we could become a little dedicated to distributing the mercy, so many things could be saved, so much suffering." Because of his genuine compassion, Krishna gave Jayananda the unique ability to make people want to serve Krishna, directly or indirectly. Whenever a new bhakta would come, Jayananda made him feel that he was engaged in important work. He was older, bigger, and stronger than just about anyone in the temple, and everyone was glad to be working under him. He was willing to let people do things their own way without getting finicky about details, unless someone's creativity interfered with practical necessity. New bhakta or old, everyone felt satisfied after a day's work with Jayananda. This was especially evident during Rath Yatra time. Jayananda would organize a crew of cynics, bloopers, uncooperative personalities, and non-devotees off the street to build the Rath Yatra carts. Although many of his men sat down for a smoke during breaks, he would get them to work 10 to 12 to 14 hours a day. He was always glorifying others and working hard himself. And in fact, he worked harder than anyone else. All those qualities made him very inspiring to work with. Moreover, there was something very personal about Jayananda that made everyone want to help him. Once he and Maharaj Das were struggling to load a heavy refrigerator on a truck. Two drunks were walking up the alley, and Jayananda said, quote, "I'm going to give them a chance to do some devotional service," end quote. His enthusiasm for devotional service was usually contagious, and this was no exception. Those drunks were right in there helping, and the job was done in no time. Afterwards, as usual, Jayananda said to the drunks, "Now say Hare Krishna. Now say Krishna. Now say Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Jai Hari Bol. Thank you, fellas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada." And the next subheading is called Jayananda's Frugality. Jayananda was well known as a transcendental miser. He hated to spend any of Srila Prabhupada's money. Personally, he had almost no possessions, even during his years as a householder. When he was on the road selling incense, he would sleep in the car or on a bench, or sometimes with friends he'd make in various cities. Some of these friends, such as Maharaj Das and Jiva Das, later became devotees as a result of Jayananda's preaching. Jayananda would use his personal claim, his personal charm, and with people to get them to give everything free or at a discount for Krishna. Without spending huge sums of money, he would personally collect nearly all the bhoga, flowers, lumber, paint, and everything else where needed to put on a Ratha Yatra each year. One year there were hundreds of devotees at the temple to feed just before the festival. Jayananda went to see one of his famous friends at the produce market, Banana King Louis. He came back with 4 truckloads of bananas and first-class pineapples. Coupled with some donated milk products, the devotees ate bananas, pineapples, and cream as much as anyone could eat, all for free. Jayananda would get almost anything done for free, such as printing, advertising, or mimeographing for Ratha Yatra publicity. What he couldn't get for free, he'd get at a discount, and when he paid for it, he'd get his money's worth. For example, after the festival would end, he'd rent a big truck with everyone. He'd rent a big truck with which to haul all the equipment back to the temple. Although the devotees would be exhausted after weeks of hard work, he'd insist that everyone come out and help pack things away. Although he was a senior devotee and could have had anything he wanted, he always dressed in old dhotis and work clothes, which he'd buy at $1 per set at the Salvation Army thrift store. Jayananda, King of Ratha Yatra, is the next subheading. Jayananda was the backbone of the Bay Area Ratha Yatra for years, and his experience of each one was summarized in the 1977 Ratha Yatra edition of Back to Godhead magazine. Behind the scenes, Jayananda was doing everything in preparation for each festival. He would beg food, flowers, and funds, buy materials and build the carts, advertise, arrange for permits, and organize the cooking and serving of prasad. Although things always went right down to the wire, he would always constantly succeed. He would consistently succeed in fulfilling all his plans every year. After the festival, Jayananda personally brought a prasadam cake or pie to each and every person who had helped in some way or another. Because of his efforts, the devotees in the Bay Area enjoy, to this day, an amazingly harmonious relationship with the city officials. After the Los Angeles Ratha Yatra, in remembrance of Jayananda, Maharaj Das's wife, Biharini, made a whole cake, and each complete cake, each one was about this big, was taken to each of the city departments in Los Angeles. There were about 20 departments that we had to go to be given to the head of that department, and the department heads accepted it kind of reluctantly, saying that they would distribute pieces to each member of their group. And with each cake, we wrote on a little card with the person's name on it, and said, "This is for you to eat. Thank you very much for helping us." Anyway, that tradition continued. During the weeks before the festival, Jayananda would sleep at the site where the Ratha Yatra cart was under construction. He would rise every day at 4 a.m. without fail, even if it meant he was getting 3 hours sleep or less. To keep his crew enlivened, he would cook prasadam on a tiny gas stove at the site. The preparations were always carefully offered, and each was filled with so much bhakti that the temple devotees would sometimes break down the cart just to get it. Would sometimes sneak down to the cart just to get some. Jayananda regarded the final Rath Yatra in 1976, New York, to be his, quote, most successful, end quote. Here's how he described the event in a letter to Keshava Das. Before I read that description, I would just mention that Prabhupada was in San Francisco having a darshan, and when some of the devotees said, well, why don't we get Jayananda? And another devotee said, well, he's all full of grease, he's working on the Rath Yatra car. And the first devotee said, well, get him anyway. So he went to Jayananda, and Jayananda said, well, I can't go. I'm just filthy dirty, full of grease and muck from this working on this cart. So somehow or other he went into the darshan room, and he had been up all night working on the Rath Yatra, so he started falling asleep right in the middle of a darshan. The devotee next to him started nudging him. You can't fall asleep. And he was kind of like saying this in a non-verbal way. You can't sleep in front of Prabhupada's darshan. And he did it about 3 times, and Jayananda kept falling asleep. And all the devotees in the room thought that Prabhupada wasn't noticing this because he was just, preaching. And finally he looked at Jayananda and the devotee next to him, and he said, leave him alone. He's doing more service than all of you put together. So Prabhupada had a great appreciation for Jayananda, even though he wasn't, very obviously praising him or commenting about what he did. So this is how Jayananda described the 1976 Rath Yatra in New York. And also I've heard, I think Krishna Kirtan told me that where this cart was constructed on the west side of Manhattan, it was in a parking lot, and that parking lot was partially owned by Donald Trump. I think you told me this. And he had to sign off on giving the devotees the right to use that parking lot because it was empty at that time. So even though people on the left wing don't like Donald Trump, he does have some good qualities. Anyways, and I've heard that he also has an impersonalist guru or some sort of an admirer in India. That may or may not be correct. Somehow, this is the 1976 Rath Yatra description by Jayananda. Somehow I got the good fortune to work on the New York Rath Yatra. It was such an auspicious opportunity. Prabhupada was coming. He was coming there, and it was finally a first-class center in Manhattan. And somehow Toshan got an okay to use Fifth Avenue for the parade route. So it's very unusual because that parade route is reserved for the ticket tape parades after World War and for Macy's. That's a big department store in New York, for those who don't know. But somehow, miraculously, Toshan got a man to give permission to this unknown group of devotees, Hare Krishnas, to use Fifth Avenue. It's a big, famous street full of very well-appointed shops to have the Rath Yatra festival. And Prabhupada, when he heard that all about this, that he was he wanted a special certificate to be issued to Toshan, Krishna, and Jayananda to have gotten Fifth Avenue as the parade route that year. You wouldn't have believed some of the events. The night before the festival, Saturday, at about 5 or 6 p.m., we busted the tubing. So holding up the canopy was a kind of what do you call it? Tubing, aluminum tubing. There's a name for that kind of pipe. And people were watching this collapse of they were in the parking lot, and it happened at night. And it was not completely dark. It was like nightfall hadn't completely fallen, but people had watched this. You wouldn't have believed some of the events. The night before, Saturday at 5 or 6 p.m., we were raising Balaram's dome, and it was at the top when a huge gust of wind caught it and blew the whole thing down. The framework was busted, the tubing twisted. I didn't see how we could exactly rectify the situation, as there was so much to do on the other two carts. But two devotees who are expert builders vowed they'd somehow get it together. I had some extra pipes, etc. And they worked all night. And by Krishna's grace, at 3 in the morning, we were at 5th Avenue and 58th Street and on Sunday morning, ready to roll. There's no place like New York for Rath Yatra. The parade was tremendous, as was the scene in the park. Even when we pulled the Rath carts back at the construction site, people would come out of their apartments and bars and chant the Hare Krishna mantra. I guess that occasion was the perfection of my cancer in Krishna consciousness. Jayananda at that time was diagnosed as having cancer, and he somehow or other led the parade. He was at the front of the parade in front of the Rath Yatra car. And he was very weak at the time. Jayananda said of Srila Prabhupada, I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work with him. In his dealings with Srila Prabhupada, Jayananda kept his usual low profile. He was generally off working on some project where Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco, when Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco. That relationship was, therefore, as Karandar describes it, quote, one of old friends, or, quote, very economical, he wrote. That is to say, Jayananda did not go in for long meetings with Srila Prabhupada, even when, at the time, other temple leaders were doing so. By way of reciprocation, Srila Prabhupada would invariably call for Jayananda when he arrived at the temple. Sometimes he would have to make repeated requests, and when Jayananda was finally located, he would resist, saying, "No, I can't go see him. I'm too dirty. I'm too fallen." He'd work after festivals and let others see Prabhupada. That Jayananda's relationship with Prabhupada was shown. Service to Prabhupada, let's see, I can't read all this. Service to Prabhupada was the core of Jayananda's life. Once Donavir asked him, how does one make spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness? Jayananda answered, I don't know. I'm too busy working to think about it. Srila Prabhupada always appreciated Jayananda Prabhu's sincere effort. He wrote to Jayananda in December 1975. I think I read that letter. I'll read it anyway. It's different part. I was very happy to get your recent letter. I always remember thinking of you and praying to Krishna to your advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yes, I remember the old days in San Francisco. Krishna has been so kind upon me to have sent so many sincere disciples to help me push on this movement on behalf of my Guru Maharaj. You continue with your program there in San Francisco, always strictly keeping your principles, and Krishna will bless you with greater and greater realization of the importance of this movement. I am dependent upon you, my other disciples, to carry it on. I hope this meets you well. Jayananda's, that's an quote from the letter. Jayananda's final meeting with Srila Prabhupada took place in New York City at the 1978 Rath Yatra. When Prabhupada arrived at the airport, Jayananda drove the car to pick him up. Prabhupada was sitting in the back seat, and he asked, "Who is driving?" The devotee said, "This is Jayananda." "Oh, I know Jayananda," said Prabhupada. "He gave me $5,000 to print my Bhagavad Gita." Then the next subheading is called Jayananda's Fearlessness. Jayananda was not only big and powerful in body, he was strong with faith in Krishna consciousness. Nothing could frighten him. Once in San Francisco Market Street, Jayananda was playing mridanga and leading a kirtan party when, down the street, an anonymous man appeared. He was at least 7 feet tall and weighed perhaps 300 pounds. His unkempt beard and drunken appearance indicated that he was an old veteran, long in the bars of his pension. As he approached the kirtan party, the temple's reserved kshatriyas, temple presidents reserved kshatriyas, Keshava Das and Guru Tattva, Jayananda looked him straight in the eye and said firmly, "Just chant Hare Krishna, just chant Hare Krishna." To everyone's amazement, the drunk simply turned and walked away without a scrap. The ultimate expansion of Jayananda's fearlessness came at the end of his life when he was diagnosed with leukemia and cancer of the lymph glands. He wrote from his hospital, "I am at the temple for a month, going to the clinic, and now I am back for a couple of weeks of intensive treatment. Actually, the whole thing was a real blessing, as it made me realize that death is right at hand. Somehow I need these potent reminders to help me advance in Krishna consciousness. For the time I was in the temple, I was appreciating Krishna consciousness so much more than ever before. So it's been a real blessing." Even in his last months in Los Angeles temple, Jayananda never succumbed to fear or self-pity. When his old friends would come to his room and see his withered form and ghostly appearance, they would find it hard to talk their way around his condition. What Jayananda communicated, on the other hand, was complete disinterest in the whole subject of his health. Instead, he was scheming how to put on Rath Yatra in Los Angeles. Sitting on the lawn of his wheelchair, looking like death personified, Jayananda would not stop thinking and talking about Rath Yatra. Karandar remembers looking at him from his desk. Jayananda was there, the epitome of Krishna consciousness and fearlessness of death. Karandar thought it odd that he didn't feel any pity or remorse for Jayananda. Then he could understand that Jayananda was so Krishna conscious. How could anyone look at him and not also be Krishna conscious? Jayananda pushed on the Los Angeles Rath Yatra until he was so weak that he could no longer pick up the phone and call old friends to ask for donations. Factually, he collected a large amount of Lakshmi and devised the various means by which the festival could take place. The festival managers admit that. Without Jayananda's presence, the first Rath Yatra festival in Los Angeles would not have taken place in 1977. Thus, he proved that by engaging in devotional service, one transcends even the year of death. And the last subheading says conclusion. That Jayananda passed away while Prabhupada was still on the planet is not insignificant. In this way, Srila Prabhupada was to confirm to all of us that everyone should follow the example of Jayananda. Certainly those who knew Jayananda couldn't take it upon themselves to preach about the qualities of humility, eagerness to serve, equanimity, and devotion to Krishna and Prabhupada. We offer our humble obeisances to such devotees who understand these qualities and try to share with them. We offer our humble obeisances unto His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada and to Sriman Jayananda Prabhu, the exemplary teacher of devotional service to Krishna consciousness. I'm going to hand this out. It's just got a few photographs. I'm not very good at PowerPoint presentations, but you can look at some of the photographs if you want. Just pass this around. While this is being passed around, I want to mention that one thing that Jayananda said is that I want to leave my body before Prabhupada, and that happened. And another thing that happened when this Rath Yatra car was in stages of being built in the parking lot of Los Angeles, the devotees had made 3 large cakes that were replicas of the Rath Yatra cart. They were decorated with the same colors as the Rath Yatra car, red, yellow, and blue. And Jayananda was too weak to even go there. So a couple of devotees said, well, he has to come. You have to get him out here. He has to see these carts and see all the devotees and these cakes. So we devised a little bit of a ruse and said that Lalitanath, the guy who was building the carts, wants to see you. He's come up against a construction problem that he can't solve, and he needs to talk to someone who knows something about engineering. So very reluctantly, Jayananda went out there. And as we were walking towards the parking lot, which was about 200 meters away from where he was, he heard the devotees chanting Hare Krishna and Happy Birthday, because it was near his birthday, and actually it was his birthday, and then he realized what was happening, that it was a trick to get him to come there. So we asked him to eat the first piece of cake, and he said, I'm not going to eat, I can't eat, but I want to say something. And he could barely talk. His voice was kind of weak and warbly, but he stood up from his wheelchair and spoke. There was no microphone, and he could hardly be heard. And he talked about how great the Rath Yatra is and how wonderful Krishna consciousness is. And then he took the cake, sat down. And before he ate it, he passed down pieces to the children who were present, because he just didn't want to be the first one to have a piece of cake. So that, and then he passed away a few days after his birthday. And that's why his parents came to the Rath Yatra festival. So if you have any questions or comments to make, or any memories, now's the time. Yes?
I remember Jayananda Prabhu, when he left the play, that he was hugging the tape recorder with Prabhupada chanting Japa.
I wasn't there when he passed away. It's quite possible. What I also heard was that the garland from Lord Jagannath fell down at Lord Jagannath's feet at the exact moment that Jayananda passed away, because they have deities installed of Jagannath, Balaram, and Subhadra. But I don't know. That's just what I was told. I was in San Diego at that moment, collecting for the Rath Yatra. So any other things that you want to say? Oh, there's a book that I just saw today. It was announced that there's a book written by a devotee named Vishoka, all about Jayananda. It's probably not available yet, but I said, how can we get this? So when I find out, I'll next time I give class, or whenever this answer comes back, I'll know where the book can be obtained. And Vishoka's been it's going to be a very interesting book, because he's been writing it for about 20 years, so it'll be fairly thorough. Yes, you wanted to say something?
There's another nice story which shows how Krishna looked after the parents of great devotees. When Jayananda Thakur's mum was about to leave her body, she was in hospital, and a nurse which was looking after her for quite some time had some feeling that morning to put her tilak on, so she was a devotee, but she never wore tilak. And that morning she just had a nurse to wear tilak, and she wore tilak that day and went in to see the mother. And the mother realised that she had the tilak on, just like her son did, Jim. So the mother, in the final days, actually got the association of a very nice devotee and got the chant. This was really sweet how Krishna looked after his mother also in her final days.
I went with another devotee to see her. They lived in Grand Junction, Colorado. This was after her husband had passed away. And she looked kind of withered, but she had a very clear memory of what Jayananda was like. And one thing, and she's passed away now, that she told, after Jayananda's funeral, Chandanacharya and Chittsukananda Rameshwara and I went to the cemetery, and his body was cremated, and it went up. They had a very interesting procedure. The body was put in a cardboard casket, and the cardboard casket went up on a conveyor belt into a furnace. And when the furnace bellowed smoke, that was the symbol that the body had been burnt to ashes. And at that moment, Jayananda's mother and father were there. She finally showed some emotion, broke into tears. But when we went back to Rameshwar's office, and it was kind of like a boardroom, and all sat around the table with his parents, they started telling stories about their son, and they were in a kind of happy mood, because I went to a funeral once in New Zealand, and it was the first funeral that I'd ever been to. I was raised in the United States, where people just talked positively about the deceased, and they told all good things. So this was like that. Everyone talked about Jayananda in a good way, including the parents. And one of the things that we didn't know that we found out about him was that once when he was driving a car, he turned a corner too quickly, and the car rolled over. It was an old Volkswagen. And it was kind of like a scary recollection, but the way they said it was in kind of a jovial way, and nobody was hurt. It was kind of an interesting thing. So that way, they told a lot of different stories about Jayananda. Another thing that his mother said, I could go on, but we have time limits. She said that when he was about 6 or 7 years old, a young child, they went into a church. And he kept looking around, and finally his mother said, what are you looking around for? And he said, I'm trying to find out where God is. Where is God? Because he knew it was the house of God. That's all he knew. Anyway, it was a very interesting experience. So these are some of the incidents from his life that highlights. There's much more to tell him. If you want to get the book, whenever it's available, I'll let you know how to get it. Hare Krishna.